In this lesson, I'll teach you how to test asynchronous functions. First, I've included two files into my project. The first file is a db/users.js file. This is simply a file that exports 3 objects in an array, basically simulating a database. Next, I have a users.js file. This is a file that exports 2 functions, find user by ID and find user by email, and it exports these 2 functions, basically simulating a database model. The first function, which is find user by ID, returns a promise, and what it does is it tries to find a user from the database, which is our file that we imported, and if the user is not found, it rejects with an error. But if the user is found, then it returns a resolved promise with this message. The find user by email does exactly the same thing. Now, this is asynchronous because there's a set timeout, which means it takes approximately 10 milliseconds for this operation to complete, and it also returns a promise. The parseStringify function is different because it's synchronous. So we are going to learn how to test asynchronous code. The first thing we want to do is create a users.spec.js file. Then we would require our functions from the users file. The functions are find user by email and find user by ID. We'll start with the find user by email function. And the first test we want to do is finds a user by email. And we can check our database. We have a user with my email right there. Okay, so how is this test going to look? The first thing we need to know is it's asynchronous. So let's see the behavior of the test runner when the function is asynchronous. So we are going to create an actual, which is calling the find user by email function and passing in a valid email of a user in the database. Then we'll create an expected, which is an object with message of user found successfully, and it also has the data for the user, but let's not worry about that at the moment. So we are going to assert dot equal actual and expected. Don't worry about the assertion for the moment. I'm trying to make a point. So for us to be able to assert, let's require the assert module. Okay, so let's run this test, which is an asynchronous function, and see how the test runner handles it. So we'll run npm test. And now you can see that the test runner says failed asserting that a promise pending is equal to this object. And that's because our function returns a promise. But we want to test the data that is coming from this promise. So this is how we are going to test it. It's not going to have this structure. The first thing we are going to do is receive a function here called done. It's a callback. When we call this function, it notifies the test runner that our tests are done running, because the test runner is never going to wait for an asynchronous process to complete. So we are going to call the find user by email function .then, which means when it's successfully finished, then we are going to write our assertions in there. So in here, we are going to say assert dot equal, and we can get the response from this function here, and we can assert that the response dot message is user found successfully. Now, once we receive the done function, the test runner is not going to stop the test just like it did. It's going to wait for us to call the done function before stopping the test. For example, let's see what happens when we don't call the done function. I'll run the test, and now you can see that this test is pending, and then it waits for 2000 milliseconds and we have a timeout because the mocker sees that we've received the done callback and it expects us to call this when our tests are done. So inside the promise, we're going to call done, and that's it. So now we run our test again, and great, we have 4 test passing. Okay, so that's how easy it is to test an asynchronous function. We receive a done callback, and since this is a promise, we can have a .then waiting for the promise to resolve, and then inside the resolve function, we pass in our done and we call it so that the test runner is going to know we are done with our test. That's the first way of testing asynchronous functions. The second way is to return a promise from the it function. So it finds a user by email, and we are going to say using the return promise method. And this method simply requires that we return find user by email, pass in the email, and then we can have our .then receive our response, and then have our assertion. So I'm going to copy my assertion from here and paste it here. And now if we run this test, we have 5 successful tests because we are returning a promise. And run the test. So you could be using any test runner, but the rules are most likely the same. Whether you're using Jest or Jasmine, when you return a promise from the test runner is going to wait for the promise to resolve before actually ending the test. And when you use the done function, it's going to wait till you call done before it ends the test. The final way we can test async functions is using async await. So we can say finds a user by email, and we are going to use async await. And for us to use that, we have to make the it function callback async. Here, we are going to say constant response is equal to, and we would await find user by email, and we'll pass in the email. What this does is it's going to wait for this promise to resolve before actually continuing to the next step of the code. And the next step is our assertion, which is here. And if we run our test right now, great, we have 6 successful tests. So the first way to test asynchronous functions is to receive a done callback, write whatever we want to write in the test, and make sure we call the done function when we are done. Using the done method, you have to always be conscious to not have a timeout. If you receive the done callback here, make sure to always call it in your test. If not, the test runner is going to give you a timeout. The second way we can test asynchronous functions is to return a promise from our test. When we return a promise, we can run our assertions inside the resolve promise, and the test runner is going to wait till the promise resolves before running our assertions. The final way is to use async await. We await for the promise to resolve before running our assertions. The test runner is automatically going to wait for this promise to resolve before executing this line of code. Now, one final important practice you always have to perform when running tests is to make sure that your test assertions are actually successful. Let me show you an example. I'm going to delete F from this statement and run my test. And now we have an assertion failure, and this tells me that my assertion is actually working. Okay, I'll put back the F, run our test again, and now it's successful. It gives you peace of mind and confirmation that your tests are not just passing, right? They're actually running assertions and they're successful. Alright, make sure you test this function. Again, go through testing the find user by ID function till it sticks. I'll catch you on in the next lesson.